Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Side Stories. As always, I am Aaron, and my co-host today is...
Dr. Professor Colonel Jacob Douglas Rumpsa here, reporting
I see.
for duty, sir.
Oh, well, welcome.
Crisp salute.
Welcome, one and all, and including you, Dr. Professor Scholar Mage,
Yes.
and other such titles.
Welcome, one and oligarch.
There we go. All right, well, today... we're talking about a very interesting American hero. We're continuing our World War II series. I believe this will be the second episode in my either trilogy or quintilogy. I think that's 4. Tetralogy? I think there's different names for if you have 4.
I think it does change, yeah.
Yes. But anyways, there's many World War II episodes that will be doing this, and they're all recorded out of order, just like every good episode of this show. So, once again, we're here in the Side Story studio, and we're just going to hop right into it. Today we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. But before we get confused on who we're talking about, let me pull up the proper naming scheme so that I can properly explain to you Let me explain to you who we're talking about today. So, quick note about names here is that we're talking about Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of Theodore Roosevelt, who was the president, right? And that's not too confusing, but you also have to understand that Theodore Roosevelt, the president, the guy on Mount Rushmore, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's also named Theodore Roosevelt Jr. because nothing in history can ever be nice and simple and clean cut. And let's just back up the train a little bit here before we get lost in the weeds. So, Theodore Roosevelt Sr. was the father of Theodore Roosevelt, the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually a really interesting person as well because he was the founder of both Metropolitan Museum of Art and the American Museum of Natural History. He also was a New York businessman, philanthropist, a very important figure in New York history. Actually, I found out that the Roosevelt family, or at least the family that became the Roosevelts because they kind of changed their name 1 or 2 times over the years. Yeah, they actually lived in New Amsterdam, as in what New York was when the Dutch had it, so before the British did. And actually, their plot of land that they had it contains where the Empire State Building is now.
Oh, nice.
Yes, so they were actually at the very heart of what would become New York City before the city even existed. So this
Prime
family,
real estate.
Yes, this family is, in a lot of ways, American aristocracy, and they even have a coat of arms and everything. They're kind of like the ye old landed elite of because they were here before the country was even founded. So it's a really interesting family. But again, not to get too lost in the weeds, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on that. But we might delve into that in a different episode. But anyways, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., very important New York businessman, philanthropist, right? Has a son who is Theodore Roosevelt Jr., but he doesn't go by Jr. throughout any of his life. He's known as either Theodore, Teddy, or TR. And of course, he becomes president, as we know. And of course, he's North Dakota's favorite adopted son because every state wants to have a president. And none of the presidents were born here, but he lived here. So we're just claiming him as our own because why not? Sure, South Dakota put him on a mountain, but who cares about that?
He lived here for 6 months.
He
That's
lived
way
here.
better.
He lived here for it wasn't longer than that.
It wasn't even a year.
Was it really?
It wasn't even a
I
year.
always forget about that. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
It's but during his time here, he decided to get
He
back
owned
into
land
politics.
here for quite a while.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. But yeah.
Physically here? No,
Not
that long at all.
But whatever. It was also during his stay here that he decided to get back into politics, though. It was a very important shift in his life.
He came all the way out here and said, "This sucks. I need to go back and be in politics."
He did have a lot of interesting stories of his time here, though. And he seems to have thoroughly enjoyed it.
He enjoyed everything he did. I don't think there's many things he didn't
he
enjoy.
embraced life with a smile. But we're not talking about that guy. We're talking about his son, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who is technically Theodore Roosevelt III, but the naming scheme is kind of one off because Theodore Roosevelt II decided not to go by Jr., and so there's plenty of Theodore Roosevelts still alive, in fact, who are all related to, the famous one because they're descendants, but the numbering scheme is all out of whack because of that.
Yep.
I believe the oldest one who's currently alive is Theodore Roosevelt V, who I think technically goes by the 4th.
Yep, that is correct.
And then there's a 6th, and there might even be
there's a 6th we know for certain. I don't think there's a 7th. You don't have the confirmation.
Yeah, because they're kind of a weird mix of public and private people, because some of them are really public figures, others are very much not.
Yeah,
so
I believe the 4th, the 5th is a businessman, so he's a lot more private than...
And a former Navy SEAL, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting
Again,
people.
It's a big rabbit hole, but I just wanted to explain that all the Theodore Roosevelts basically add a number to their name, unless you're talking about the actual first one. Everyone past him, it gets a little bit kooky, so just so you're aware, I wanted to clarify that because it's a big rabbit hole, and Aaron spent a lot of time getting confused about who he was actually reading about. Not in today's subject, but everyone past him, it gets much more confusing after that.
Yeah.
So we're not going to worry about that, but just to, again, not waste all of your time, but just to explain that briefly. For the purposes of this episode, we will be referring to Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the one that we're talking about, as either Theodore, Teddy, or just Theodore Roosevelt Jr. So we're going to, because he went by basically all those names. So if we say Jr., we're talking about the actual Jr.
Yep.
For lack of a better term. And if we're going to be talking about his more famous father, the president, we'll try to clarify that. So just so you're aware. But anyways, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., right, getting into our story for the day, was born at the Roosevelt Estate in Oyster Bay, New York in 1887 to Theodore Roosevelt, the president, and his second wife, Edith. His siblings were his eldest half-sister from his father's first marriage, Alice, along with Kermit, Ethel, Archibald, and Quentin. All good old New York stock names, as you can tell.
Yeah.
Great name. There are a lot of great names in this family, trust me. There's going to be a lot of naming. Everything comes back to names and nominal determinism on this show lately, so very interesting.
You'll see as we go.
You will see, yes. And again, Theodore Jr., subject of today's episode, was the eldest son and carried his father's name, as you are now abundantly aware, both of which meant his father placed a lot of pressure on him to live up to his legacy, because if you're going to start a naming scheme that confusing, you better make it worthwhile. And at one point, actually, this almost caused Teddy Jr. to have a nervous breakdown due to all the pressure, but luckily he was able to muscle through it. I believe that was during his like kind of young adult era as well, probably when he was just kind of entering into public life and that sort of thing, which is frankly understandable. It's a hard act to follow a president whose father was also, again, a major American figure, so you're carrying on the legacy of not just your president father, but also your very famous grandfather, which is quite a lot to hold on to, especially when you're the eldest son, too, especially at that time. That's a lot. But getting back into a little bit more about what we know about him, from an early age, Theodore Jr. was instilled with a sense of duty, conviction, and courage. Something, again, his father really helped to instill in him. And I found a great quote here from Theodore Jr. where he recounted later in life some of the times he spent with his father. And, quote, "I often walked to the office with my father. On the way down, he would talk history to me. Not the dry history of dates and charters, but the history where you yourself in your imagination could assume the role of the principal actors, as well as every well-constructed boy wishes to do when interested. During every battle, we would stop, and father would draw out the plan in the dust in the gutter with the tip of his umbrella. Long before the European War had broken over the world, father would discuss with us military training and the necessity for every man being able to take his part." And I got that from the Military History Hall of Honor, by the way. So end quote there. But just so you know, I didn't make that up. That's a great quote. I think also during the timing, I could be wrong, but when we said the European War broken over the world, I think he was referring to World War I.
Yes.
Because this was a little earlier. Like this was pre-World War II, that quote. But we'll just say that would happen again, not that long after. But he was talking about how he was instilled this great, rich sense of history. Because again, Teddy Roosevelt was a historian, and is still actually a historian that people do cite, especially like the big thing that he wrote was the Naval War of 1812, which is still cited to this day in like papers and documents and books on that war, and just goes to show that Theodore Roosevelt actually knew quite a lot and was a very smart man. I think we often portray him like he was definitely like a very physically active, like an obscenely physically active person, but that didn't mean he was dumb. And I hate that trope nowadays that just because you're strong you don't have a brain, which is ridiculous. I mean, back in the day, by golly, if you were strong you were probably really intelligent too, because it seems like people who really took care of themselves back in the day knew what they were doing and had to be able to take care of themselves, so they just didn't get injured, frankly. And a lot of other things too, but that's just a trope that I've really come to hate.
Or strong, stupid people didn't make it long enough.
Well, that too, yes. I mean, to be fair, stupid people used to not be able to make it quite as far as they can nowadays. But before we get into that topic, let's keep moving on to Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Teddy Roosevelt Jr., again, strongly considered a military career. He wanted to study at West Point and possibly some of the other military academies, but mostly West Point was what he was looking at. His father, however, discouraged him and pushed him to go to Harvard just as he had. So Teddy Jr. went along with his father's wishes, and in 1909, he graduated from Harvard. Afterwards, he went into business and banking and amassed a sizable fortune for himself. And in 1910, he married Eleanor Butler Roosevelt, the less famous Eleanor Roosevelt, because everything with names is confusing. But again, Eleanor Butler, not the other one you're thinking of, which is FDR's wife, who is also Eleanor Roosevelt, and the more famous one. But don't worry about it.
Don't mention that one to me.
We're going to get into that later, too. Jacob's got a bone to pick with the more famous Eleanor Roosevelt, and actually a legitimate one. I always like when modern people have, like, these like problems of historical, not like in a lame way though, not like I just judged them as a bad person, or like people told me because it's unfashionable to like them now, or like it's the narrative. I like it when you have some weird personal vendetta against them. That's what I really enjoy. That's what I really, really like. I have it out for Diocletian, but I'm not going to get into that. I've had it out for him for a long time. Okay? He better not come out of his grave. I will put him back in. Anyways, again, 1910, Teddy Jr. married Eleanor Butler Roosevelt, whom they had 4 children together, and they all had amazing names. I'm just going to read them off real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Grace Green Roosevelt McMillan, Theodore Roosevelt IV, also known as the Third, because names, Cornelius Van Schack Roosevelt III. I want to learn more about 1 and 2, and then Quinton Roosevelt II. All wonderful names. And by the way, Theodore Roosevelt IV and Quinton Roosevelt II would both serve in World War II later. Again, more on that in just a bit. Anything you have to add, Jacob? I'm sorry, it was about 10 straight minutes of me talking.
No,
there,
you're
so I just wanted to make sure.
You're covering it better than I could for certain.
Okay, well, again, just jump right in. But anyways, let's keep on rolling on down the road. So still wanting to be prepared for military service, even though he didn't end up going directly in the military. He still wanted to be able to serve if possible. So an interesting little thing played out. So in 1915, Teddy attended General Wood's training camp. And General Wood, Jake, I believe you have an interesting note about him.
Yes, he was
Leonard Wood, by the way.
Yes. I mean, there's a fort named after him.
Oh, good.
But yes, he was there's a lot about Leonard Wood, honestly, so I'm going to really restrain myself and say as little as possible. But it was the former commanding officer of President Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War.
Which is a very interesting connection.
Yes, so it makes sense why he's, I believe they got along pretty well, obviously. I believe they actually, it wasn't just a casual leader of the training camp, and student relationship. It was, family friend kind of thing, yes. But yeah, I'll save any more about Leonard Wood. Very interesting character, though.
Okay, someone worthwhile that we can look into maybe in a future episode. Who
exactly,
knows?
Yeah.
But anyways, he went into... So Leonard Wood was holding a training camp, which was a private camp run to provide military training for well-to-do men as a means of expanding the officers' corps, as World War I was then ongoing, but the U.S. was not involved because it was 1915, so about a year into the war. And there was a pervasive fear that the U.S. would end up getting dragged into it. And like many pervasive fears in America, it ended up being completely accurate, and everyone was right. But no one did quite enough to avoid it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
A very common trend in American history, it turns out. But again, something maybe we'll discuss. We have a lot to discuss apparently in future episodes. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so eventually, again, this did happen, and graduates of the camp were commissioned as officers at ranks which reflected their performance during this training. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was commissioned as a major, which is pretty high for someone who had never officially served in the military prior. So he does this training camp, and a few years later, commissions are granted to all these people. And again, it goes for officers, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major. He's starting off 4 ranks in, which is very impressive. And again, just shows that he was a very well-trained and very competent commanding officer to go in and be given that commission during wartime. Yeah. And again, that's very interesting. Also, his father did attempt to try and join in World War I. And in fact, General Pershing was who I believe he personally asked to let him in. And he said that, let me and my boys join up, and my boys can join up as privates, and we'll go and we'll fight the war and all that. And Pershing was like, yeah, sure, we can do that, but one, I don't think we can let you in. Or at least it was either him or one of the other generals or someone else who barred Teddy Roosevelt, again, the president, from actually joining. Mm-hmm. And I can't exactly remember now off the top of my head, I apologize. But Pershing was the one who said, yeah, we can let them in, but they actually can be commissioned as officers because they're a bit more competent than the regular privates. So that was actually part of why they got commissioned too, is that Pershing, who again was the guy in the U.S. military for like how many years, especially through all of World War I, and actually lived past World War II, I believe, because I know he didn't serve in World War II, but I think he lived just past the end of it, or at least right at the end he died. It was really close. Anyways, Pershing was a major figure, and the only living man to ever be given the rank of General of the Army, which is the highest rank that anyone in the U.S. can attain outside of General of the Armies, which is the potential possible 6-star rank, which they've never made, but that's also its own weird thing. But anyways, like, this is the guy, right? Mm-hmm. And you've been granted a commission by all these other competent people, so they're expecting you to do really well in the war. And also, real quick, before I move on to the rest of his World War I service, I just wanted to say that those training camps that Leonard Wood put on are basically a precursor to the modern-day ROTC training program. So that's where this weird camp thing came. It was kind of like their dry run of ROTC, which became much more formalized.
Yeah, it worked pretty well, it sounds like.
Yeah, it started as, again, a private institution where you just pay for military training because this country used to be cool. Yeah. And I don't know if you can quite do that anymore. I think now I think certain federal agencies try to look at you if you do that kind of thing.
Yes, I'd like to be a major.
Yeah.
Here's $100,000.
It's really changed in a century, hasn't it? The things you could just do. But again, we're not going to get into that. I'm on enough lists already. But anyways, yeah, so shortly after the war broke out, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was commissioned, and he was sent to fight in France with the American Expeditionary Force.
It's worth noting as well, he's not the only one in the family. All of the men served. His brother Archie was offered a commission as a second lieutenant, and Quentin had already been accepted to the Army Air Service. And then Kermit just, he went with the British for some reason.
Why did he do that?
Again, I'd love to do a brief bonus episode on Kermit, because he's fascinating.
We should. We'd probably have time. We'd have time.
But anyway, let's move on.
Oh, yeah, let's again, we can't keep getting distracted with all the other cool things. But
there's so much cool things.
To be fair, that is how you know someone was a great person or was really interesting. If you read their life, you're like, wait, hold on, who's this other guy? Or what's this about? Or what does that do? When you can really linger and focus on these things, that's how you know someone was a really interesting person. So hopefully that's coming out for our listeners here at Thing. This guy lived a fascinating adventure of a life in a family that's had many fascinating adventures. Yes, as World War I broke out, they went over to France. Again, he's commissioned as a major. And actually, his wife came over with him about a month after he arrived in France. And they actually had a house over in France. I'm not quite sure if they owned it or if it was some place like they rented, but they had like an actual house.
That's cool.
Right? And it became a sort of crossroads for the whole family. So like Archie, Quentin, and actually his sister Ethel's husband, Dr. Richard Derby, were all at the house. I'm not sure if they were always there at like the same time. I'm assuming because people were serving, they were kind of in and out.
Yeah,
but it sounds like they were at least there together pretty regularly, or at least somewhat. And I guess if he's serving in France, I guess France was on the defensive, so they wouldn't be moving forward too much.
Yeah.
But this is also the end of the war where things get much more mobile. But anyways, he served with distinction, being referred to as the best battalion commander in the whole division, according to his division commander himself. So pretty high marks. In fact, actually, he went up in rank as the war went on. He retired to lieutenant colonel, at least after World War I, which is pretty solid progress going from never having done this before to ending in just a few years at lieutenant colonel. And then he was also noted as being very courageous, and he cared deeply about his men, in fact, leading them into battle from the front very often. This has become a habit. And he also went so far as to buy every man who served under him a pair of combat boots with his own funding. So he just he wanted to make sure that everyone was taken care of, serviced, and they could run away really fast. I'm just kidding. But a good pair of boots is good for running at and running away from the enemy. Never doubt the ability that a pair of boots will give you. Never do that. He's a very smart man, as you can tell. And he also fought in a number of battles, including the Battle of, French names. Let me see if I can get this right. The Battle of Cantigny. I don't know if I got that right, sorry. And then the Battle of Soissons. He was wounded at Soissons, as a matter of fact, and he suffered injuries from gas and a gunshot wound to the leg, which forced him to use a cane for the rest of his life. And, Ethel's husband, Dr. Derby, who I mentioned earlier, it was actually him who would operate on Ted, saving his legs. And it's a good thing that he was around, because he probably could end up in a wheelchair like another Roosevelt, and we'd be even more confused about who we were talking about, which we don't need more of that.
So another lesson, hope your sister marries a doctor.
Yes. Always get a doctor in the family. That's the lesson for the day, kids. So after his, frankly, stellar performance in World War I, comes back home. Life's pretty good, right? He does a little small thing where he helps found the American Legion.
Just a small thing,
Yeah, which you may know better as that place that always has the veterans that hang out at the specific bar in town, the American Legions. That's pretty much that's not the only thing they do. Obviously, it's a major veterans organization, but they always have a bar with them, which is how you know it's a good organization. God bless the American Legion, and support your local Legion, folks. Wonderful a message from Side Stories. There we go. Do we have any we have a little bit more about the American Legion, don't we?
A little bit more, and Roosevelt Jr.'s role with it. But first, I just had a weird mental quandary.
Go on.
What did they do during Prohibition? Do they still have
Huh.
Was it a bunch of veteran bootleggers, or was it on the opposite
Well, actually,
side?
a lot of veterans did get into boot.
So yeah, probably.
I hate to say it, but the dark story about the U.S. military is a lot of guys get into crime after they're out of it, and that's just the fact of life. There's a lot of them who later joined the mafia, many bootleggers, and the ones after World War II joined other mobs, and many of the guys in Vietnam became cocaine runners. And again, this is all true. I'm not trying to knock anybody. In fact, it's actually hilarious. And there's a lot of good stories that came of this. And some of them became mercenaries fighting in various African countries, too. I mean, others went on to have, solid, more straight-laced political careers like our man Teddy Roosevelt Jr. here. But many others basically just became mercenaries and crime members. So it's really one or the other when you join the military.
Depends on if you're an officer, I guess.
Oh, yeah, that too.
That definitely would help.
Yeah, that might help.
But, yeah, so Roosevelt Jr. was a major player in the foundation
And
of...
a major.
Prior, yes.
Sorry, easy joke. Go on.
Big player, big boy.
Big boy.
Big guy, in fact.
It's a whole family of big boys.
Yeah.
That's the scientific term.
But yeah, he was nominated as its first national commander, but he declined because he didn't really want it to be considered associated with his politics, because he was getting very much into politics at this time, and he didn't want to kind of sully the office by making it seem like it was a political move. He's like, no, I want to do this for the veterans, so let's not do this while I'm also going to be running for offices.
Which is both humble and prudent, I would say. It made it so that the Legion didn't come off as a major political organization right away, and all those.
It could have backfired really badly.
Yeah.
It could have been fine, but it was definitely a risk that he did not want to take.
And I think that was probably wise of him. As probably interesting as it could have been, because I'm sure he would have had a very long career with it. But still, he helped found it. I mean, that's pretty solid as is.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm sure he was involved in other ways, too, probably his whole life.
Oh, I'm sure. He definitely was the type, kind of New York socialite who was just
sort of,
everywhere.
again, they're really, truly old New York aristocrats.
Yeah.
And again, New York used to be such a better place. It used to have such interesting people in it. And the sort of, again, these really old, American landed sort of gentry people are really interesting. And a lot of them just stuck around. A lot of them are still around today. They're very interesting families to study. And I'm glad we got to talk about this today, because it's such a fascinating thing, how much these people get involved in. Which, speaking of politics, what did he do next, Jacob? What was his next big political move?
His next money move, as they are called, I'm told.
Scientific term.
Yes, exactly. He was appointed by the president after Wilson.
Harding.
Yes, Harding.
Look at me,
Warren
I know my
G.
presidents.
He's a guy. Warren Harding was a guy.
We should really do a series on. We should do a series. Okay, well, anyways, possible future teaser for Side Stories episode on every president you've never heard of. I think that'd be a good one. That'd be a good series.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could do a whole season of that.
Oh, easily. But so in his administration, Harding's administration, he is appointed as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, which is the exact office his father had held prior
determinism
to
strikes again.
Spanish-American War. And during that time, there is a scandal that happens, a very famous one known as Teapot Dome.
You may have heard of this one, actually.
It is...
Depending how good your social studies class was.
Yes, exactly. I was about to say. It's something that you hear a little bit about. It's actually, it's one of those things that it's super complex to explain, but it's also, I think I can make it simple to understand. Essentially, there are these government-owned oil fields.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I believe at this time they're technically coal, because they use coal to make fuel oil. Very weird detail, but essentially they get energy production, oil-related things.
Fuel resource fields. Maybe even a mix, who knows?
The reason why I keep saying oil is because oil companies then, the fields are leased out in an uncompetitive market, essentially, to certain companies for a large sum of money.
So it's sort of like illicit contracting in some ways.
To an extent, it's really one of those...
Backroom deal.
Yeah.
Corrupt.
The man behind this all is the Interior Secretary. I believe his name is Albert Fall. Yeah,
Fall.
He's the Fall guy.
Yeah, is he actually?
No, actually, he's definitely just the one responsible. But...
Well, did he take the fall?
Yeah, he took the fall, but that was deserved.
Nominal determinism strikes yet again.
So essentially, the reason why Roosevelt Jr. is involved in this is because these oil fields were under the Navy. They were then transferred to the Department of the Interior, and that's who then, Fall was in charge of the department, leased out this uncompetitively. And again, a lot of nuance with this, but essentially it's very clear that this was a corrupt deal. The oil companies profited greatly from this. And unfortunately, Archie Roosevelt Jr.'s brother was a vice president of a subsidiary of the oil company. So it definitely looked like there was a connection.
Bad luck.
And officially, they were all completely cleared. They had no involvement or knowledge that Fall had been doing this, especially considering the smoking gun in the case, there'd been a lot of like weird records were going missing, and they assigned the youngest, the most junior senator in of the opposite party, the Democrats. He was literally, he was the investigator.
The meddling kid.
Yeah, the meddling kid, literally. And
I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you, meddling kid.
You meddling kid, and the $100,000 loan I took at no interest from the oil company guy that looks a little bit bad now that you're looking into me.
Maybe
How
he
odd.
had a dog that helped him investigate too. You never know.
Who knows?
Not to make a dumb joke out of it, but yeah, I do find it funny that the Fall guy gets taken out by the meddling kid. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it really is. It writes itself.
It does.
But yeah, there's a big stain on Roosevelt's reputation because of this.
Just because of his adjacency to corruption, really, and even though he seems to not be personally implicated.
Yes. Well, he does seem to be personally implicated, but he is officially cleared later, and that's, again, is because the brother...
I meant more in retrospect.
In retrospect, yeah, he looks pretty darn clean. Unfortunately, at the time, which is what matters for politics,
unfortunately,
he looked very, very guilty, or at least complicit at best.
And that's, back at a time when people cared about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Really bad. I find it funny that, like, Teapot Dome, definitely a bad thing, but, like, we wouldn't even care about that now in a lot of ways. Ugh.
It would be a weak news story.
Yeah,
and then...
at best. Oh my gosh, the things that have been coming out and just the whole apparatus. Really, the past, 50 years is just insane.
Mm-hmm.
But again, stories for another day.
Yep. So during this time as well, he begins running for governor of New York. And I mean, you can mention some of this because I'll jump back in when it comes to
okay, just put me on the
person.
Spot. Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt Jr. ran for governor of New York in 1924. And the weird thing here is that, again, New York is on 2-year cycles for governor, so these are going to happen really fast. And he's running against a very popular incumbent by the name of Al Smith. Now, Al Smith, I believe it was, so he's incumbent, but I think he'd been governor, he had won one term, then he had lost another term, then won re-election, and now he's running against Teddy, is what it should be. And... because, again, New York used to have a lot... well, it still has wacky politics, but they used to be a lot more exciting, is what I've learned.
Yeah.
Well, unless you count that other thing... yeah, no, we're not going to worry about that. There's some things about New York recently that are various shades of orange that are really interesting. But that's a different tale for another day that we're not going to talk about. Fascinating stuff. But anyways, 1924. He's running against Al Smith, who, again, is... very popular governor. He is actually someone who will later run against another Roosevelt in the presidential race. He runs against FDR.
In the primary.
In the
primary.
Yes,
in the Democratic
yes,
primary.
Yes, you're right. In the primary. Yes, correct. Sorry, I was getting a little ahead of myself there. For a second, I was like, no, it was the other. It was I can't remember the name of the Republican who actually ran against. Yes, that. That was president. I'm thinking the one afterwards.
Oh, Alf Landon.
There you go. Yes, Alf Landon. I know who they are distinctly in my head, but sometimes I get the names confused because, like, Al Smith and Alf Landon.
Smith, Alf Landon, pretty close. Yeah, fair. I understand
Al Smith's in the primary. Okay,
yep.
But yes, and he would actually be one of the Democrats that FDR would have a lot of, like, very public disagreements with, and they would get into fights a lot. And Al Smith, again, being governor of New York, was a very prominent Democrat and also had very different ideas for how the country should go. And again, another interesting character we might cover one day. Who knows? But anyways, now he's running against Teddy. And again, all that stuff about FDR, that's coming later. Don't worry about that as much. It's not to get the timeline.
So this is the first time that it's worth noting that FDR
is going
comes
to get
into the scene.
Here. Which, why don't you mention that now? I think now we've set the stage.
Yeah, sure. So FDR is publicly speaking out against his very distant cousin. They're, I believe, fifth cousins, which is, they share the same name, but it's very, very distant relations.
Very big family.
Yes, very important because Junior's actual cousin, just one branch away, is Eleanor Roosevelt, the one who then
his wife, the one that marries Franklin Roosevelt.
But she is, his blood cousin, very close relation, and she is married to FDR at this point, and they are both very publicly shaming Teddy Jr. for his association.
Yes.
Supposed.
Alleged. Never
his
proven.
involvement with Teapot Dome. And they have some words between them for certain. But Eleanor Roosevelt, she takes it a step farther than just statements.
This would be a theme of her.
Yes. So she follows Teddy Jr. on the whole campaign trail in a car that has a bonnet, like a hood shaped like a giant teapot that was made to emit steam, and countered all of his speeches with her own, basically just calling him immature and corrupt, which is...
You're driving around in a car that looks like a teapot woman. Who's immature?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
She later, takes it back and says, oh, that was cooked up by, the Democratic Party
I just
people.
Did it,
yeah.
But I did... Oh, gosh.
Yeah, sure.
Uh-huh.
But, Teddy never forgives her for
Which,
that.
honestly, can you blame him?
I mean, I personally can't, because I'm just going to be honest.
I personally can't.
I have taken an active interest in this. Like I said, I have an active bone to pick with that woman over
Jacob,
there.
Take actual grudges with historical figures and make them personal to you. These people might be dead, but do it anyways. This is good for you.
President Roosevelt was the one who led her down the aisle to marry FDR, and she stabs his son in the back so hard. Ugh.
What a betrayal. Who could do such a thing?
This woman. I was struggling not to use a stronger term there.
Oh, dang, I think I'm on your side. I don't like her at all either.
Yes. But I digress. Tell us how the actual election went, Aaron.
All right. So this was a very interesting year in New York City because it was back at the time when New York could go either way politically, technically it has trended a little bit differently very, very recently, but again, stories for another day. But that year, the split of the votes ended up being 49.96 to 46.63 for the governor's race, with Al Smith just barely coming out on top there. Pretty tight race. And in fact, if you look at the for those who like political box scores and looking at the kind of system machine politics and the numbers, if you look at the election that Al Smith was in before this one, and also the election that he was featured in after this one of Teddy Jr., they were much more split votes. Like, he ran away with over 50% in both of those.
So this was closest
this
contest
is
by
pretty
far.
close, other than the one that he had lost
of course,
prior, but even still.
Second closest contest.
But again,
by far.
he still came back after that loss.
Yes.
This is the only time in like more of his mid kind of career as governor where he came close to really losing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very interesting. In fact, it was actually a very good year for the Republicans in New York because they won basically every down ticket position, and it was only the governorship, which the Democrats held on to, again, basically due to the popularity of incumbent Al Smith, which again, Teddy Jr. almost took it from it. It was almost a clean sweep year, which is still very impressive. And typically a popular candidate does help everyone down ticket. So it's interesting that the Republicans did so well down ticket, even if they didn't take the biggest prize. So probably does speak something good of Teddy's influence with the party and politics.
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not you agree with the party platforms of Democrats or Republicans in the 1920s is up to you, but I'm just saying that in terms of peer system politics, a good showing. After this close, but still a defeat, Teddy decided just to continue off his political career, and actually, unlike many people who move from Puerto Rico to New York, he decided to move from New York to Puerto Rico and became governor there from 1929-1932. A very interesting reversal of the usual trend.
Yeah, that is quite backwards. I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting little tidbit there, and we're kind of entering into the weird mid-period in his life here where, like, it's in between the world wars, but it's after he's, like, super prominent in American politics, because the governor race, like, he's always a popular figure, like, well-known, especially locally, but this is when, like, his chance at really ascending to the national stage and, like, being prominent has mostly ended in terms of, like, politics, per se. Again, governor of Puerto Rico is no small thing, and hey, more power to him, but it's much more of a side, obviously, than, being governor of New York or, being involved actively in Congress. It's more of a, you're doing good for your country, but you're just kind of in this more periphery position. And so there's not a ton really to say about this period other than, like, here he was, this is what he did, and then he also became Governor General of the Philippines, which, again, reminder to all you Americans who didn't have good social studies classes, we kind of owned that for a while. In fact, for a rather long while, but again, that's something that Again, it depends how good your social studies class was. We don't have time to explain that. But he only stayed there for about a year, from 1932 to 1933. So he's hanging around in the American like territories, or I guess the Philippines was technically regarded as like a colony territory kind of thing. Its status changed a few times.
Changing, yeah.
Yes, because it used to be under the military. At this point, it's not under the military. Again, you get into kind of the milieu of things. But Teddy Roosevelt Jr., again, he was regarded as a very competent governor and generally actually liked by like the native and like colonial populace, and seems to have been pretty highly regarded. I think you had maybe one or two things to add on about that as well.
Mainly it was towards the end of it, as in, well, both places did very well. The Philippines, he wasn't there for that long, so he didn't get as much of a chance to make a dent. But in Puerto Rico, he definitely was regarded as a good governor, and he was very fond of their culture, and he definitely took note of a lot of the island's traditions and stuff, and he did his best to respect everything they did differently, which is an interesting concept, but
kind of nice that someone who's leading you has any concern for you. Nice.
At this time,
I wish we had that in modern America, but again, can't go into that right now.
But yeah, so as he's about to leave the Philippines, he wants to leave earlier for the election when FDR is challenging Hoover for the presidency.
Which is going to be a slobber knocker of an election for sure, folks.
Yeah, and so on one hand, he has the president who appointed him to being the governor general of the Philippines. On the other hand, he has family and his sister Alice, who has, by this point, completely forgiven them for everything they did to him, begging Teddy Jr. to come home and aid the campaign.
Yes, so again, just to clarify here, Hoover was the one who appointed him to these positions.
Yes.
And then FDR, his cousin, is running against him, so he's caught kind of in the middle of like, oh gosh, that's my boss. That's my cousin, whose wife I really don't like. Tough choice.
And so he announces that he is going to go back to the States, and he will come back after, essentially, right before Election Day, is his plan.
So it's kind of like him saying, please don't bother me.
It's more like, I'm needed not here. Away. And then no one likes this. The U.S. press hates it. The Philippines hates it. And Hoover essentially, Hoover through the wire essentially tells him, like, yeah, you should not leave for participating in a campaign. Like, I'm not entirely sure which campaign he is actually going to join. I'm inclined to believe, again, in my heart of hearts,
his father and pull a bull moose, which is technically still around.
That would be possible. Yes. That'd be really cool, but no, I don't think so.
Probably not what he planned either.
Essentially, he just... he doesn't go. He's like, yeah, no, that's bad. That's fair. Like, this is bad. I'm in the middle.
One of the rare times he was wrong in life.
Yeah, but eventually FDR is elected, and he resigns his post, saying, new administration can replace me with whoever they want. And so
he just bows out. Very respectfully.
Yeah, he's he goes around after this, and I mean, you can talk a little bit about the interwar period, because there's a quote I want to find in my notes that I'm struggling to find right now. So if you want to talk a little about his interwar period.
Well, there's not a ton left for the most part. It's more just he really went on and did a lot more in the private sector. Like he was it American Express? Is that what it was? Or what was the thing that we had?
Yeah,
it was. Okay, but I want to make sure. American Express, he was like he was on like the board of directors, or he was on one of their councils, or... You got it?
I finally found it, yes. It's just after the election. But yes, no, he's on a publishing house. He's on...
Was it Random House?
Doubleday.
Doubleday. Yes, he's in Doubleday's publishing house. He's on American Express's board. And...
Yes, he's just kind of around doing more business stuff, which he's just naturally good at, as well as his other stuff.
Yeah, he's got the training, he's got the wits, I mean, he's got connections. I mean, yeah, he's going to succeed in politics and, well, really more business at this point. But yeah, he's going to succeed in business.
Yeah, but the quote I was looking for is when FDR wins the election and Teddy's asked just how he was related to, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Sounds, very different name, but still has Roosevelt. And he says, fifth cousin, about to be removed.
It's a great quote. That's a wonderful quote.
So yeah, he's very funny, just like his father.
Yes, he
had some good quotes too.
He has In fact, if anyone who is listening to this episode knows anything about it, you probably know one of his other famous quotes, which is going to be coming up here pretty soon. Because after this sort of interlude in his life where he just makes a lot of money and does a few things,
and is almost tapped for politics again, but every time it's like, no thanks.
Just the ambition probably isn't there as much anymore, which is fair. Cause
he knows eventually, up ticket, he'd fight, his cousin.
And what's the point of that?
Yeah.
It's just going to become a mess. And he's been there, done that.
And he can also kind of tell the way things are going on the world stage. Like, there's going to be at least another war.
There's a little fascist way of hitting Europe about now because...
Fashion.
it was in fashion, but it's one of those fashion trends people don't generally look at with high regard. So it's one of those trends that kind of died out. He's seeing World War II on the horizon, much like many Americans did with their very collective fear of a war in Europe. Again, the collective consciousness of America and our fears are strangely often right. We just don't do enough about it or we get involved when we shouldn't. It's very strange. The American public fear is what that'd be a topic of study, but I don't know how I would study that. But anyways, maybe for another day. But yes, you can tell that this certain guy with a funny mustache in Europe is going to cause some problems very soon. So he starts to move a bit more towards the military again. Eventually, when the war does break out, he's raring to go. So he goes and joins up, and he is once again commissioned. I believe does he just start out as like a general? Basically, just
colonel.
Colonel, yeah, right. And then he quickly makes it to general, like pretty fast, given his track record.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. It's worth noting as well that his wife personally asks George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff,
famous for the Marshall Plan later.
Yes, to return him to a combat unit, despite the fact that the man walks with a cane. But...
Yes. Also, I should mention that Teddy is also hiding the fact that he has arthritis and a heart condition from the military and totally gets away with it, which is hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really something that they're too good at checking about at this point.
Then.
Yeah.
And he's like, put me in a combat role. I got this.
Yep. So, yeah, it's 41 that he's promoted to Brigadier General. So.
What a Chad.
Yep.
So, yes, he goes and he's in initially North Africa and then to Sicily. And he does the usual thing. He performs well. We've already kind of covered that. It's again, similar to his World War I service where really he's good at what he does. He has a bit of an unorthodox view of warfare because he's still kind of fighting warfare like a cowboy, kind of like his dad did in a lot of ways. And
much too much for the front for his rank as well.
Far too much. We're about to get to the really interesting story I'm sure many of you have heard. But it's interesting that his view on how you should fight in warfare gets him into clashes with, of all people, George Patton, who seems to have been a rival of his in many ways, but also like a friend, like frenemy is sort of kind of
it definitely would apply here, yeah.
Yes, and in fact, actually that's his relationship with a lot of the generals in the army, where he either has outright friends or people who really hate what he does, but he's way too competent, charismatic, and frankly cool to really do anything about it. So he just kind of gets away with all these shenanigans of like, what if I just lead from the front? What if I go and make sure my men, like what if we just take care of them? Or what if we do this or that? And this...
What if I'm not dressed to regulation at all times?
What if I always walk with a cane and I just have a very like laissez-faire, very casual view of all the things happening around me, and I have almost no sense of alertness, and yet I always get things done on time? This really ticks off a lot of people, but it's really funny. It's really the thing is, it's the rare time where like competent people are mad at other competent people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're different kinds of competent. Usually, it's like you're an idiot and people get mad at you, or think you were smarter. No, in this case, really, they're all just good at what they do. They're just good at doing it in different ways. So it's very interesting to read into like the depths of these stories. We're gonna skip to the most famous one here to give you the cream of the crop Teddy Roosevelt Jr. story, which again you've probably heard, but it's worth retelling. So there's a little thing called D-Day. You've maybe heard of that, depending on how good your social studies class was. Or if you ever watched Band of Brothers.
That'd be a really bad social studies class that misses that.
Don't know. Okay, now kids. All right. You win a gold star if you can name what date did D-Day happen without looking and without pausing this episode. I'll give you 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Did you guess June 6, 1944? If you did, you'd be correct. Good job. Okay, so June 6, 1944. Teddy Roosevelt Jr., well, before this, he is begging, pleading to be thrown out onto the beaches with everybody else. He is like the only general I know of who is begging, absolutely begging. It's the largest amphibious invasion to this day in all of human history that we know of, discarding any like ancient super warfare we're unaware of. Outside of the Atlantean conflict against the Nephilim, we haven't discovered yet. It's the largest amphibious assault we've ever seen, right? And there is one guy who is 56 years old. He has a cane and a heart condition and arthritis and who knows what else. And he is begging Eisenhower to put him on a boat and to land on Utah Beach. He asks 3 times, gets rejected twice. On the 3rd time, he finally breaks everybody down and they put him on the boat.
And they did not expect to see him alive.
Everyone thought he was going to die. He was so charismatic, they sent him on a suicide mission when they didn't want him to die. That is the kind of gumption this man had. That you can't teach that. It's just a gift. Nominal determinism is real. It's real. So the next thing that happens is, again, he's in, and technically the actual like amphibious assault, because Operation Overlord is the catch-all term for everything going on. But technically the naval component is Operation Neptune. So he's taking part in both of them. That's his aspect of it. So he hops on a boat. He's leading the 4th Infantry, yes. And he is landing on Utah Beach. By the way, his son, Quentin Roosevelt, is actually landing on Omaha Beach. Both men, well, would live through the war. I know, spoilers for history. I'm sorry. Spoilers for history. But both men would, well, through the battle. I said war.
Through the battle, yeah.
They'll both live through the battle. Spoilers for history. But anyways, getting back to this. So Teddy is on the boat. He is raring to go. They finally get to the beach. However, the currents and the wind...
This is Utah Beach.
Yes, Utah Beach, yes. The currents and the wind and possibly some of the fog, because it was a foggy day, and also there is a lot of bombing and artillery and other things causing smoke. It's really not ideal conditions to land anything, frankly, but they did it anyways. God bless them. By the way, they had delayed it a day. Originally, the plan was June 5th, and so it's even suboptimal on June 6th, so it just shows that how bad must June 5th have been? My goodness. But anyways, they land about 2 kilometers off course. Again, 2 kilometers off course. They just ended up at some random place they weren't supposed to be at. And so everyone's just like there because Teddy is there. He is the highest ranking man on any of the beaches and the oldest. He's hanging out with a cane and a map and his pistol. And that's about it. And he's just like looking around. Everyone's like, okay, so we made it to the beach. What do we do? Right? Just imagine the looks on everyone's faces. They're trying to figure out why they're not getting as shot at as they thought they would. Because they're still taking fire.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is they didn't just land at a safe spot, but it's like, okay, well, we expected this to be a little worse. What are we going to do? And so Teddy just looks around. He says, we'll start the war right here. Because he had realized that the place they landed at was actually better than where they were supposed to be. There's less fighting. And again, as our man Sun Tzu pointed out, if you don't have to fight, why bother if you could just win? Thank you, base Zoo. Genius. But anyways, so he's like, okay, yeah, we're going to need to redirect like the entire division. Yeah, them to me, right? I want them here because this is better. And in fact, there's one great quote from a sergeant from his division where he said, Roosevelt on the beach was like, and I quote, with a cane in one hand, a map in the other, walking around as if he was looking over some real estate, unquote. He was incredibly casual about the whole thing. And so what he did is he led multiple trips up and down the beach with his cane and his bum leg, taking fire from who knows how many very angry Germans who were having a bit of a dispute over who owned France that day. And they really thought it was theirs. Turns out it wasn't, but they really were trying to press that claim, it turns out, with machine gun fire and mines and artillery and barbed wire and all the nasty things you found on Utah Beach, which was also, again, the smallest beach. Just so you're aware. I think they did this a grand total of like 4 times where he hobbled back and forth, up, down, up, down, up, down. Apparently he even climbed the seawall and everything.
He was essentially making plans on the fly,
yes,
directing where to go. Again, like, yeah, where we landed, much better. Come on, down this way, down this way.
He's fighting a war in 1940 like it's a war in 1840.
Honestly,
he's getting away with it. He's literally pulling like Winfield Scott-esque moves. And completely, he can't keep getting away with it. How does he do it? It's brilliant. It's wonderful that someone pulled this off, right? Just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And eventually, I think I have the score. Yes, as the score settled here, the 4th Infantry was able to penetrate mainland 6 miles. And of the 21,000 troops that landed over D-Day and D-Day +1, I think is what this review is. Because, again, by the way, for everyone who doesn't know, D-Day +1 is the day after D-Day, because how the Army and military counted this is every day after D-Day, you plus however many days it's been, just so you know. Yeah, D-Day, D-Day +1, I believe is what this score is for. Out of 21,000 troops, you want to guess the number of casualties they took?
Oh, gosh. No idea, actually.
197. 197. Wow. All they took. Stunningly good numbers.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was worse.
Shockingly good numbers. And that's just because this guy was like, oh yeah, I got lucky. I'm just gonna start. We're just gonna fight here. Screw it. We don't need to. Again, the Sun Tzu of 1944. If I don't need to fight, why bother? I could just win. Some people are born lucky. Nominal determinism strikes again. Again, that's all I'll say. But unfortunately, nominal determinism also striked one more time, because the only thing that could kill Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was himself. Because about a month later in France, as he's helping to move on with the troops, he dies of a heart attack in his sleep. Mm-hmm. It finally caught up with him. And I say that nominal determinism strikes again because his father died of an autoimmune disease, because the only thing that killed these people is themselves. Tragic, but kind of funny and also amazing. Mm-hmm. In many ways.
This is also, he's very young for this, 56 only for a heart attack.
Yeah.
Like,
though he had been...
He knew the heart condition was there.
Yes, and I should mention, I don't know if I think I mentioned it earlier, but when he took the injuries in World War I, he was gassed, and that probably shaved a few years off his life too. Or at least didn't help anything. Again, hard to prove. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I mean, I can't do an autopsy on the guy now. Which, speaking of which, he's actually buried in the American cemetery in Normandy, which is interesting to note. And also, his funeral was attended by basically all the major generals, and it's funny, all of his frenemies had very nice things to say about him. Mm-hmm. And Omar Bradley said that the bravest thing he'd ever seen was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. on Utah Beach. So true. And even Patton was like, he was the bravest man I ever knew, even though they had been fighting. And Patton could really be quite the scoundrel when it came to not liking people, it turns out. That man held a grudge. That man held a lot of grudges. But even he was like, nah, he was cool. I miss him. Also another man who would die tragically young under weird circumstances, but story for another day. So yeah, that's basically the life and times of Teddy Roosevelt Jr., though I should mention, interestingly, because his father was awarded the Medal of Honor, and for his service in World War II, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was also awarded the Medal of Honor. They are one of only 2 father and son duos to have won the Medal of Honor. The other is the MacArthurs, Douglas Arthur and his father, Arthur MacArthur, I believe, because I guess they like names that were alliterative.
I like him. I don't know.
Yeah, and there was an interesting thing based on his... Sorry, I know I kind of jumped into that whole D-Day story. I just wanted to get it all in one run there, much like Teddy Jr. did, back and forth, back and forth. But you had something with his rank that was interesting that we should mention as well.
Yes, so posthumously he was given a higher rank, but he was actually supposed to get it before he died. It had been approved by his commanding officer the very day he died. And so as it basically got to Eisenhower, the news also got to him about he's unfortunately passed, which is funny because that same day he'd had a talk with his son who landed at Omaha Beach and had gotten off fine, and he died in his sleep, essentially. Yeah, he was sleeping in a truck they had stolen from the Germans, actually. Like, it's something they had just captured, and that's just where he happened to die, is like he just took a nap. Well, he went to bed in the truck for, I don't know why he's sleeping in the truck. I guess that's just, he thought it was comfortable, but he just happened to have a heart attack and he died. I don't think it had anything to do with the truck. I just thought that was interesting that he literally died in something he had captured. Well, he did get medical help. Yeah, he wasn't like asleep.
Yes.
He was, I think he was at, it was at 10 p.m., so he was laying down to sleep.
Yes, he was laying down to sleep. They reviewed him, and I guess they had assumed he would be okay, or they couldn't do much
Died
else.
about midnight. Yeah, they couldn't really do anything.
There wasn't much else they could do. So, yeah, that's the... Anything else we should add for final thoughts, or anything we missed here? Anything we can wrap around and recap that you're seeing in the notes here? Because I think that's pretty much everything I have. Just wanted to double check.
I'd say that's pretty much it, though. Right. As Aaron's really been hammering home, nominal determinism in this
is real.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is definitely one of those rare cases of great man coming from a great man because the great man was still able to raise a great kid while also being a great man. It's a very important lesson. The Roosevelts are really good examples of this for the most part.
Not too many duds overall in the family.
No, especially this branch of the family. FDR is a little bit different, but that's because he had his own health problems and other things like
very different circumstances.
Being president for entirely too long.
Yeah, it did well, actually it didn't. It totally did kill him, by the way, because he died in office. I feel like that's one of the presidents we kind of forget died in office. Like, people, the way they talk about FDR, it's like, he was president, and then again, and then again, and then again, and we just kind of stopped talking about him. It's like, and then Harry Truman showed, like, no, he died, guys. He died. He didn't just, like, go away. He died. People just kind of, like, I know people know that, but you ever notice that? This way people talk about it, it's not like he just up
go
and died.
Away one day.
Yeah, it's like he went to the ranch, the ranch in Arkansas or whatever. He just he retired. Like, no, he died. I don't know. It's like, I know he's obviously listed in lists of presidents who died in office, but it's just like people don't really recognize it as much. I don't know. It's strange. People don't talk about it. Anyways, that's just a random observation I have. But otherwise, what do you have to say about our man, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., technically Teddy Roosevelt III?
I think he had an amazing life.
Oh, for sure.
And I think he probably enjoyed every minute of it.
I think
he seems the type of man.
He was. There's something to be said about being incredibly competent, yet shockingly happy-go-lucky about almost everything in life. Because that's really how you win, because no one can hold you down. And especially when, again, you pull these crazy moves, and you just keep getting away with it.
Yep.
Some people really are truly something about rich New Yorkers. They can really get away with a lot. It's fascinating.
It is all personality, though. There's definitely like certain events that I might talk about more if I do a bonus episode on Kermit or the other family members.
I think
in general.
we have to now, right?
Kermit definitely takes things a lot differently. He ends up in a very different place. They both died during World War II, it's worth noting, but for very different reasons. Which, again, we'll get into teasing bonus episode that may or may not come. But
no, it'll come.
It'll come?
Yeah, we're going to do it now.
Absolutely.
We'll have enough for this season where we can fit it out, especially because
Perfect.
we've had some scheduling flip-arounds, but we're going to have enough for the season. Again, I'm sorry to everyone who I told this was going to come out in the summer of 2023. Oops. Look, it's not my fault. I moved to a new house and I built a studio because I went insane and all this other stuff. Again,
Aaron spent the summer in Australia of 2023. It's fine.
No, I didn't spend it. I wish I did. That'd be cool. But no, not what I did. I was instead just going completely nuts, and I was living my best happy-go-lucky life, not really caring what people told me, and still getting away with everything. So really, I was just inspired by our subject for the day. There you have it. And with that, folks, thank you for joining us on this wonderful episode of Side Stories. It's always a pleasure educating and hopefully entertaining you a little bit. It's edutainment, as we like to call it here on Side Stories. So without further ado, we'll stop wasting your time or giving your brain so many brilliant ideas on how you should live your life that you are now going to, I don't really know.
Take the Roosevelt pill. Take the Roosevelt pill.
I thank you. I didn't have an ending for that. Okay. All right, folks. It's been great. You all have a wonderful day. God bless, and always be a Chad. Always be a Chad. Get out there and do something great for your life. And change your name to something cool.
Exactly. Name your kids something
cool.
Yes,
so that they, too, can obtain the power of nominal determinism. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. See you on the next one.